Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Propervarian and this is Crusader Kings III's Dev Diary number 68. Today we have Inspiration Never Dies. This is quite the interesting Dev Diary, but I have to be honest with you, I have been a bit undercover in recent weeks, months even. I mean, it's like 1.5 months I think since I did the full load of videos, and that is because I am looking for a different video type, and in the sort of a situation where I'm looking for a different video type, I have been reading a ludicrous amount of papers written by historians, of course, so academic papers, books, and so on and so forth, reading up on the reality of medieval life, and that is going to come soon, very, very soon. I'm hard at work when it comes to that, but I would also like to use this opportunity of this video to do a bit of theory crafting for what could be done in CK3, what could be implemented, and how it differs from CK2 and why I think it should differ this way. I would invite you to, after this dev diary is over, to still be here in this video so that, you can then give me your feedback from what I am about to tell you. So, first we're going to cover the dev diary, and then we're going to move on to some theory crafting, in particular here when it comes to trade in the Mediterranean Sea. So, let's jump into Inspiration Never Dies. This one is basically about a very specific, very special way to get high-level artifacts. So, different from CK2, there will be now a difference there. You already had this sort of in CK2. In CK2, when you crafted an artifact, I believe there was a limit where kings and emperors could craft certain artifacts that are not able, or rather not available in terms of quality, that you can never get if you are a count or a duke. So that is quite interesting. They give you now a very special way, and I say special way because in CK2 those were all the same buttons. You just, hey, I want this armor, I want this weapon, I want the crown jewels, for example, and then those would be crafted, and the upper limit would be based on what your rank is. Now this is different, at least slightly, because they implemented it in a bit more natural way. The artifacts themselves will be familiar to those of you who have used them in CK2, but how you actually get your hands on them will be slightly different. One of the major ways of how you will acquire artifacts is this right here. Characters throughout the world can gain what we call an inspiration. Inspirations come about as a character is seeking to create something extraordinary, resulting in the character wanting to pursue the means of realizing their inspiration. They may want to write a great tome of knowledge, weave a tapestry, or forge a magnificent crown. There are many different kinds of inspirations, all resulting in various types of artifacts upon completion. An inspiration can be broad, such as someone wanting to merely forge a weapon, or very specific, like a character wanting to forge a sword. What we have right here is Frederick, and Frederick is Saxon, he's Catholic. I'll be honest with you, I don't know whether I would hire this man, because as we will find out in a second, he wants to make a weapon, as you can see right here, and weapons, basically, in how good they can be, scale with military, so with the martial skill, and with prowess. And I'll be honest with you, I've seen better people when it comes to that, but for this example, they're basically hiring this character. Inspirations only occur for landless characters. We want to extend the immersion of guests and courtiers by making them valuable to you, even if you have no desire to push their claims or use their skills as a counselor. Now, this is something that I've seen, not really criticized I think, but brought up as, is this really the right decision? And the way I see it is basically, of course, there is this sort of thing where landed characters could technically also be, utilized to do this sort of thing, to craft an artifact, but I do think that in relation to, hey, how did it work in real life, most of the time you didn't have any of the noble people actually do it. It could be immersive if you have a very particular character, if you are that particular character, but I also do think that more skills, or rather more quality added to the wanderers and to the characters that you can invite, so the landless characters, other than, hey, I want to push a claim, I think that is desperately needed. So I personally actually support this. I think this is a good approach to make it so that I am more interested in all of the landless people that hang around in my court. Usually you kind of just ignore them, or you push their claim and then they just become a vassal, so stop being unlanded. Some characters that are genuinely just unlanded are basically useless, in particular if you have a big realm and want to have all of your council spots filled by actual vassals. Inspired characters will travel the world from court to court, seeking a wealthy monarch to sponsor them in their creation. Realms with a high grandeur will be able to attract inspired characters more frequently than those with low grandeur, granting them a higher chance at receiving skilled craftsmen that will be able to forge an artifact to meet your expectations. I think this is also cool because it is a very natural connection here. We come in from a point of view where if you already have a reputation of being somebody that has money, and somebody that has a reputation of, hey, I am here to show you my prestige, and I got the prestige, then of course you will attract more able craftsmen. A question that came up here for me is, I assume, whether they are 3D animated or not, and this is something, some will be animated, others will not be animated, that there will be artifacts for certain culture groups. I believe we talked about this, or rather they explained this in the dev diaries, although I'm not entirely certain when and where they did it. But my question is, if I, let's say, as a Saxon Catholic, for some reason get, an Ashari, so a Sunni Bedouin, will they make something in the style of Sunni Bedouin, or will they make something in the style of Catholic Saxon? That is a question that I have. I think it would be quite interesting to get a bit of a, an international flair there if you were to hire somebody from far away. How would they be familiar with, the actual artistry that takes part in the artifacts created in your culture compared to their own culture? Obviously, they would be more of an expert of their own culture unless they really live for a long time in this foreign land, but I think it would be quite interesting to have a situation where I can basically say, yeah, you know what? I live in Spain, and maybe I treat the Muwaladi Muslims quite well. I might be a Catholic ruler, I'm okay with them, I'm okay with the Andalusians, with the Bedouins, and so on and so forth. And maybe I would like a crown that is in their style to signify, hey, I'm the person that, brings peace for everybody on this island, not just for the Catholics. I think it would be cool. It hasn't been confirmed here. I would be interested to find out more on that topic. Now, where were we? Once an inspired character arrives at your court, you can choose to sponsor them by giving them the gold they ask for. A skilled character will demand larger amounts of gold, but will also yield better results in creating an artifact. Most of the time, at least, no one is infallible after all. So similar to CK2, in CK2, you had an event where it was basically just bad. You could, of course, bring this up. Honestly, the CK2 chain suffered from classical CK2-ness, by which I mean that once you've seen the events, you've seen the events. That's how it's gonna play out basically all of the time. You can, a child can learn from the guy or from the blacksmith, for example, and when that happens, it can alter the quality of the product, but you've already seen this event. They're gonna make it a bit more varied in CK3 from what they are saying here. I hope that it does turn out that way. But basically, it is just generally more interesting, supposedly, by saying, hey, you can't just click the button of, hey, yeah, I hire a blacksmith. No, instead, you actually need somebody that legitimately is inspired. Even then, it can fail. Like in CK2, I assume they could steal the money that you give them. They could basically create a bad artifact. I assume all of those things do indeed exist. The skill that is relevant depends on the type of artifact they want to make. For example, a weapon and the quality it gets is dependent on the character's martial and prowess skill. So we can see that right here. Yeah, again, very bad prowess, but you can't have everything in the world. Writing a book, on the other hand, scales with learning. I'll be honest with you, I assume Frederick was just given an inspiration. I assume that, honestly, he's just not that good. 14 is pretty decent, really decent, but like 6 is pretty bad. Either way, sometimes you will pick up a bad character with an inspiration. That's just the way it is. In this case, fund inspiration. They will join your court and you will fund them, in this case, 300 bucks. That is quite sizable, I think. That is basically a mercenary company that you could use to conquer more land. They will gain 40 opinion of you, and you can see it right here as well. Weapon inspirations are based on martial and prowess. Yeah, you're funding the inspiration. It will be a dagger. I do wonder how exactly they decide that, because it says right here, weapon inspiration. Do you get a dialogue that says, hey, what sort of weapon do you actually want? Honestly, not certain, but definitely an interesting tidbit there as well. After finding an inspiration, it will take some time for the character to create the artifact. During the creation progress, various situations can happen, such as the character asking for better materials to work with. Below, you'll find such an example in which my inspired character finds excellent material at the local market. Approve their request and pay the material, and you'll increase the overall quality of the artifact they'll produce. Let's read through this. Inspiration, highest quality. My lord, look at the metal. I've never seen such fine quality before. My beneficiary Frederick breaks away from our market procession to accost the merchant selling the coveted item, ecstatic over his find. With this, my project would reach new heights. I could create something truly marvelous. Please, my Kaiser, bestow the gift upon me. Now, I love, absolutely, God sees what Frederick needs. But of course you have, do you think I'm made out of money? Of course, but surely we can get a fair price and your project is worth investing in. I assume that this one, since it is fairly expensive as well, this is basically a third of the entire cost, a bit more even. This guarantees a higher quality. You can see it right here. There's no question. It just says will be of a higher quality, not could be. I assume, get a fair price is probably a probability there. Then absolutely guards. I'm not sure. You still get the entire stash. I assume you just get, basically tyranny. Maybe even with your vassals, maybe, I don't know, maybe he just dislikes you because you mistreated one of the market members that, of course, he is affiliated with. Honestly uncertain, but it is quite the interesting idea. If you have enough of these events, and if these events are responsive enough to different character traits, that even if you get this event multiple times in a playthrough, that you will see it in different variations. At the very least, that is my hope indeed. An inspiration gains progress similar to that of a scheme. That is really good news to me, because I'll be honest with you, in CK2, you click the button and then you were like, and now I'm waiting. At some point, he's gonna tell me, I got everything and it's done. Right? That's all it was. Now you have I hope that there's a bit of an overview as well. It just says you'll gain progress depending on a chance each month, making the actual time it takes to to complete vary. So the way I see this, I really hope that we get a specific interface just so that we can tell where we roughly are, when to expect it. It could be ticking in the background, but I'll be honest with you, I just really hope that this is a bit more visual, and it is just an estimation even if you see the progress much like you do with the schemes. Once the inspiration reaches full progress, the character will approach you to present their creation. And here we have it when the thing is actually finished. Inspiration realized. My lord, my beneficiary Frederick approaches me with a wide grin, sweat dripping down his forehead and soot smeared across his face. I have toiled over the forge many days and nights, but finally my work is done. He presents me with an object wrapped in cloth, and as I unveil what is hidden, my eyes grow wide. A folded iron dagger of excellent craftsmanship. On the blade of the sword, there's an inscription that reads, "Owned by Kaiser Heinrich of the Holy Roman Empire." I mean, honestly, we could kind of... Did they really write "owned by" on there? Wouldn't it just read Kaiser Heinrich of the Holy Roman Empire, you know, the one and only? Either way, we got a neat little symbol right here. Kaiser Heinrich's dagger is what we can see as well. We see cloth behind it as well. I honestly assume that this indicates the quality. So the way this is colored here, I have to assume is, you know, reminiscent of the garb that, you know, for example, he's on the floor, maybe royal silk, and so on and so forth, making it so that this indicates this is the highest quality. This is excellent craftsmanship. Maybe there's one higher, exceptional or something, but yeah, that is pretty good. Frederick did something despite, you know, maybe not having the best stats. Mind you, this is not the only way in which you can get an artifact. Inspiration exists to serve as the most significant means of doing so, since they will generally grant you artifacts of a higher quality. You can still get artifacts by other means, such as getting them in events. I hope you enjoyed this brief look into how an artifact can come about. Stay tuned for more information regarding the Royal Code. I can't read anymore, but it's not that important because this was the dev post. Now, there are some dev responses. We're going to get into that in a second. I really hope, on a basic level, that we don't exclusively get artifacts, and I mean new artifacts. We already knew you can pillage artifacts, you can steal artifacts, and so on, but to create a new artifact, even if it is of a lower quality, I would still like to initiate that to some degree. Maybe there is still a decision, maybe there's just a button, hey, I'm a duke, I want to create a dagger as well, but then you just get a random NPC, right, that isn't inspired, that makes maybe a normal, maybe a good one if you give him enough money, you know, weaponry that you are basically commissioning there. I think that would be good, because I do think that the low-level economy shouldn't just, you know, be, hey, I got a random event and I can get this now. I think there should be a bit of a process behind that would be rewarding, as we know already. And this is one of the things that still, I'm not entirely certain how it sits with me. I think Royal Code, like 95% of the things that we've seen so far from it, I like. But I'm not entirely sold on the idea that, you know, of course, anybody that isn't a king and anybody that isn't an emperor is already cut out from grandeur. These things don't exist for dukes and counts. And I understand it as so far, you know, hey, this is one of those mechanics that you get in the late game that should reward you for getting into the mid to the late game, that sort of stuff. But I will say at the same time, that it does kind of mean that there's this entire subsection of characters that don't interact with it at all, and I really hope that at least artifact creation, you know, in a rather generic concept, I guess, at that point, because you don't get an inspired character, is not also exclusive and, you know, limited to kings and emperors. Beyond that, I am quite happy. I think this is the better iteration. This is the reiteration on top of what we've had in CK2. Again, in CK2, everybody had that decision, and everybody just had these generic events. It's just that the upper level of what can be reached with those events can be higher for kings and empires in CK2. So this is basically just that, but you give the blacksmith, you give the weaver, and so on and so forth, a bit of an identity, a bit of a face. I would even love it if at some point, you know, let's say Hastings loses, Hastings becomes unlanded, if he got inspired. A sword made by, or rather an axe made by Hastings, wouldn't that be nice? I think that would be absolutely awesome. But yeah, this is it for the diary itself. Let's move on to the dev responses here. As long as you have the gold for it and inspired characters at your court, you are able to fund as many inspirations as you like, so that is pretty good. You can have multiple ones running at the same time, which honestly makes it doubtful for me that there is an interface there. Because that, you know, hey, if I got 10 inspirations running at the same time, which is excessive, fair enough, right? But that kind of feels like it would not work with the interfaces that we commonly get in CK3. I really, really hope, though, that we do get an interface as it is. A Weaver inspiration makes use of diplomacy, for example, while weapons and armor both use martial and prowess. They said the tome is learning. Some use multiple skills, others just use a single skill. I wonder what diplomacy means. Like, what you could make with diplomacy. Good question. Maybe also a tome. At the end of the day, you could write, you know, hey, here's the treatise on the topic of embassies. There were embassies, of course, in the medieval period as well. That could be interesting as well. But I wonder really what it is. There is, of course, this differentiation between court artifacts that are actually displayed in your court and then regular artifacts that you just have. Will the artifacts be 3D models? It will depend on the artifact type. Certain artifacts will be shown in 3D. Yeah, honestly, I expected as much. I think there will still be a bit of a differentiation. Let me just turn off the highlighting here. There will be a bit of a differentiation there, and I think that, I mean, honestly, was to be expected. I am very excited, though, what, for example, El Tyrannos can do with it. If you didn't see that, he just released a new patch called Men of God. Absolutely gorgeous. You need to look at that if you haven't. Inspired characters will only travel to the courts of kings and emperors, but as I mentioned in the dev diary, there are alternative ways of getting artifacts so that counts and dukes are able to procure artifacts as well. I assume that is basically a confirmation of the decision. You have events and hopefully again that decision. Does the creator of the artifact have his or her name in the description or somewhere to note who was the creator? If I have my own Chaucer, you know, not even gonna start pronouncing that, who wrote for my English king an exceptional tome, I would like this name to be remembered somehow. Artifacts can have names on them, yes, it's a bit random, but some artifact may be named after its creator or after whom it was created for. Dear Paradox devs, I pray for a button that lets me edit names. I really do. I pray for it. Would be amazing. Would be necessary. Could I poach inspired characters from another realm by, say, offering them more money or using a hook on them if I have one? If you have the means of getting them to your court, you may indeed poach them and fund the inspiration yourself. Yeah, fair enough. There you go. I mean, I like the system, but I also find it odd that if as a high learning character I want to write a book, I have to look around for somebody who is inspired to write a book and pay them to do it. Or as a legendary warrior, I can't have my own idea of what type of sword I want. I have to randomly look around for a guy who is inspired to make a sword. Inspirations are the primary way for you to get artifacts of a higher quality. We will have alternative methods of getting artifacts in general. This is still being worked on, however, so I can't go into details of how that will work quite yet. So, we already have... If I think about doing something yourself, right? So again, this is for the highest level of quality. But we already have the family history in the diplomacy tree. Oh, that's something I didn't even consider. You know what? Generally combining artifacts of any level with perk trees. I think it would be a cool idea. Listen, I think it's fine to have the highest tier of artifacts limited to actual experts, so inspired characters. But I think if you basically put perk trees on strategy, or rather put, you know, books, for example, or even weaponry to a certain degree, behind the military trees, so you unlock it, and then, hey, you can initiate creating this now on your own, and learning, you know, something on religion, maybe something that makes creating a heresy easier, or that defends the faith in a better way, you know, gives you a bonus against other enemies of a different faith, that sort of stuff. You should probably be able to do that yourself if you have unlocked certain parts of the perk tree, which makes it even more interesting now to spec into specific perk trees. I think that would be a great idea. I would like that a lot, because then you could actually create those, you know, artifacts, but each character has to create artifacts that are specific to who they are, and they are actually genuinely limited by that. I think it would be pretty cool. Either way, what I want to talk about now is the topic of trade. So now let's talk about trade. This is a really interesting topic. I've been reading up on this for ages now. I've been reading so much. I've been reading. I'm gonna be reading more, and I've read up on so many other topics as well, because I'm currently working on a different video format. I essentially want to challenge myself. I want to have some fun with it, and for that I need to be informed about what I'm talking about, because I don't want to tell you some random nonsense. So I've been basically burying my head in academic papers and books. But what is so important to me about trade, and it's always been more important, is basically that the depiction that we had in CK2, and I know many people miss the Merchant Republics, and I fundamentally understand that. I think Merchant Republics is a cool aspect that is no longer there, and that sucks, right? But what we do need to talk about is that the Merchant Republics in CK2 were terrible. You may have had fun with it, but as a game mechanic, they were really bad. They were not really interactive. For example, they would build a trade post in your realm, and at best, you would sometimes get an event that says, do you want to burn it down? But at worst, you would have to go and have to burn it down by declaring war. There was no diplomacy, there was no granting shipping rights, there were no privileges, there were no revoking of privileges in your ports, and so on and so forth. The Fatimids, for example, after they conquered Egypt, they were very, very well known for basically saying, hey, if you're a merchant, we don't care whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're whatever, you can come and do your stuff here, right? Because we want to be rich, we want to be wealthy. That is fundamental what we need, fundamental to what we need to do. Because of course the Fatimids, as you know, they claimed they were the rightful. I mean, they were descendants, of course, of Muhammad, but basically they said they should be the caliphal family, and they wanted to oust the Abbasids, and for that you need money, right? You could have other realms, like for example the Umayyads. I mean the Franks, they mostly didn't have it because there wasn't that much trade going on here, but you could be a realm that says, no, I want to shut these particular people out only in this port, only in this city. And that wasn't a thing in CK2. It was an all or nothing. You could have an embargo war, and that's it. That's all you can do. And that sucked, first and foremost, but what sucked even more about CK2's system, and this is very important to me, because fundamentally they're not wrong, but it sucked. What sucked even more was the fact that trade posts and trade was super non-directional. The game did say, we understand merchant republics basically function in the way where they would establish these communities. This is, again, Amalfi's map here and how they traded at their height. In red, we have the communities that were created in these cities. So, you know, for example, here in the Levant, on Cyprus, in Constantinople, in Egypt, we had it in North Africa right here in Sicily. These communities in red are basically communities that are of Amalfi descent, okay? So these are colonies on a friendly level. So these were made, and the local ruler said, okay, these are basically trade posts. You organize your trade there, you organize that to us and with us, and that's good. That's great. We want your income, you want our income. Here we go. They did all of that. They still had, of course, connections where they weren't as established, basically where there were no local communities, but they had connections there. And what the fundamental question of trade in this period was of course, which locations can we connect that haven't been really connected or that aren't connected enough, and then make money off of trading there. In CK2, you would build these trade posts. What is on the map right here, you would build that in CK2, but it was completely non-directional. You just build them where there is wealth. Now that is fundamentally incorrect. Fundamentally incorrect. In CK2, it is not at all reflected that, for example, the Venetians, who are not on this map, but we can basically see it on this map. This is also a map of the general trade routes, so not of Merchant Republic specific trade routes, of the general trade routes. In gold we have the Christians, and in green we have the Muslims. And the fundamental target that Venice had, after they started being Venice and after they started being a trade republic that basically at the start of it all funneled, slaves that were captured in the Frankish campaigns to the east. So, for example, Slavs, for example, the Magyar slaves and whatnot. They would funnel these slaves into primarily Muslim countries, and then from those Muslim countries would get silk, would get spices, and so on and so forth. And what they needed to do to facilitate this trade was to gain privileges along the way. Because what is oftentimes falsely understood is this idea, oh, you know, I'm Venice, I'm gonna trade with Egypt, and we go down there, and I'm in Egypt. Not how it worked. They didn't sail the open sea, it was way too dangerous. Until the 13th century, they didn't even have a proper compass in this area. But more importantly, especially during winter, you would basically just die. And even during summer, if you went to the open sea, that risk existed. So what they needed was, you see right here, you know, you can always refuel, you go to Rhodes. Then, of course, with the Crusades, this is amazing. We have the Holy Land right here, so you got so much supply areas. And then you get to Alexandria. Maybe you can even get to Alexandria from Crete if you're really daring, right? That sort of stuff. But the fundamental idea of trade in this area was, of course, because that's the only reason anybody does trade, to connect places that have things that you can sell in other places. Again, in CK2, it wasn't depicted at all. Now, what does that mean? And we are on a bit of a theoretical level here, but I hope that I brought you into the topic, and I'm going to do that in, like, proper videos. I'm going to do that in a more organized way, in a more explanatory way. But what I want to see, really desperately, in CK3, is this idea that they had in CK2, which are trade posts, and then connect them to merchant republics. Because again, we have the general trade routes right here, and again, this one is very obviously, very important for Venice. You can see with Split, with Ragusa, you can see places with, of course, the places here as well after the 4th Crusade. You can see why they took these locations. Why they said we need these ports. These ports are very important to us. Why they spent money on certain endeavors to make sure that these ports stay safe and stay open. The Genoese, for example, that helped the Crusaders get to the Holy Land, later on got trade rights in Alexandria. And all of a sudden, hey, great friends down there, right? That sort of stuff happened. That is what they did, because they needed these trade routes to be open. And what we have right here is the, again, Amalfi-specific map on the height of the Amalfi Republic. And I would love it if, instead of just saying, I'm building a trade post here, and this trade post exists, and it makes me money, even if it is literally completely disconnected from everything else, I really wish that you would have to say, with this trade post, I want to connect other trade posts that are in my naval range. I think that should be a core truth. And if you take a trade post that is too far away, let's say Constantinople, you may have to talk to the rulers that, you know, live in Crete. If that is the half-seat emirate, then you could be out of luck because they want to raid this exact area for your trade, right? You could talk to the East Roman Empire right here. You could, you know, if you want to go to Iberia, you could either take the Frankish route, or you could go down here, take, you know, for example, Tunis, stop in Sicily, and then make it all the way to Sevilla, and with that to Cordoba. I think that we should talk about dynamic trade routes based on the fundamental endeavors of bringing goods from A to B to C to D and then back to A, that sort of stuff, right? The fundamental endeavor of this, and bringing that interconnection between the republics and between the feudal or clan or tribal or whatever rulers, because everything was about trade privileges. We had massive trade privileges that were granted, for example, to Amalfi here in the region of the Aghlabids. So the Aghlabids conquered Sicily in the, oh god, in the 9th century, I want to say. Yeah, I believe it is the 9th century. They conquered Sicily in that century, and Amalfi never got hit by raiders. How did that happen? The Muslim raiders never invaded Amalfi. Amalfi had all of these communities here that we know they had there. We know what sort of trades they were doing down there. How did that happen? That happened because despite of any religious difference, despite any political differences, they said, we both know we want the money and we're gonna make it here, right? This is a very important topic. This is a very, very important topic. I think that puts the merchants and the merchant republics into a direct connection to the actual feudal rulers, making proper interactions there possible. And I also think that, you know, hey, certain rulers should basically say, I can, you know, do piracy. I know we currently don't have raiding for anybody but the Norse, you know, there's some other raiding going on, but the Sicilian Normans, they were savage raiders. They raided in terrible, terrible waves in Sicily, around Sicily. Sicily in itself is known as a hotspot where many, many ships basically were lost, where many shipments were lost, and I think that should be simulated. I think that I can say, you know, if I'm the half-seat emirate right here, don't let me send out raiders that actually necessarily plunder the towns, but make it so that I can interrupt trade, that I can say, hey, I want to interrupt trade and you can't stop me. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna make money off of this, and there we go. How exactly that is depicted, because of course these trade routes would be primarily on like a map mode, for example, right? But you can depict that in so many different ways, in a more abstract way, in a more real way. Feudal lords should also be able, for example, to participate in trade in a very limited fashion, by which I mean that feudal lords, and in particular the Muslim lords of the Levant, rather often had like 1 or 2 ships, and I really mean a very limited amount of ships. Don't take this as me, everybody had a standing navy, that is untrue. But they had ships, and they would say, this ship will go from there to there. Who wants their goods on it? If you are with your goods on the ship of a lord, that lord's ship will get earlier access and earlier leaving abilities in any port that they have privileges in. So for example, if the Ayyubi dynasty holds all of this guy here in, what is this? Is this Beirut? And Beirut has a ship. That ship may go to Alexandria, and then, hey, I belong to the lord of Beirut. Let me leave, right? They leave earlier. Much more profitability, less time spent on the sea, and so on and so forth. I think all of that should be implemented. You have the roleplay opportunity of actually interacting with the colonies, with the cities, with the trade posts of the merchant republics. You can embargo, or embargo is the wrong word. You can kick them out, you can revoke their privileges, you can give different privileges to different merchant republics, to different feudal lords, making it so that, you know, they may be interested, they may not be interested. I think it would be interesting, especially though, and this is the biggest thing that I would like to bring up, I cannot see a trade system like that unless you bring in static trade routes, which is incredibly boring. I cannot see that without at least a very abstract form of trade goods within those trade flows. They didn't just transport money. And I understand we abstract a lot in this game, but I think if we really want something that isn't as shallow as CK2's Merchant Republics, and again, I want to highlight, they had really good impulses, really good ideas. It just didn't land. But if we want something that goes further, in my opinion, and this is basically the hypothesis of this entire talk that I just gave, probably for no reason. If we want that, I think personally at this point in my life, we need trade goods to a certain degree. And I would like you to tell me what you think about that, because I realize CK3 is not a number crunching game. I understand that. And I think that there's still a lot of opportunities to interact with characters, again, when it comes to privileges, when it comes to visits, when it comes to establishing trade posts and colonies, basically leasing out cities, if you will, although that is not that accurate necessarily. But I hope that you know where I'm coming from. Because I think What this ends for me, or what this entire thing ends with for me, is the idea that we cannot simulate the trade unless we simulate why the trade is being facilitated. They didn't just facilitate it because they said there's wealth there. Because you in real life, you can't say, I'm gonna go to Alexandria and get wealthy. Not how it works. Alexandria was wealthy because it was the gate between the east, so India, and the west, and because it had a very strong, coherent, complex industry, or rather economy, in its home turf, so in Egypt. And that was a very wealthy spot where you're well connected to different territories where you can bring different resources to, you know, spices, slaves, wine, of course, different, I mean, just ceramics, I suppose, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of different levels in there, and I think it needs to be simulated. I'm sorry. And I think that you should basically have like trade deals and trading rights and that sort of stuff, and that's a bit number heavy. But I think it's honestly necessary, because right now, development works. Development works. I sign that. The number does what it's supposed to do. Certain regions in the area are rich, other regions are poor. And that's mostly down to the natural circumstances. So to, for example, you know, whether you're in floodplains and whatnot. But that's it. It works, but I don't think that it's enough. There's a lot more that has to be said about trade. Again, I'm going to do a very introductory video about this, about many topics. Oh god, I got so many pages in Google Docs about notes that I took from academic content. But I basically will make a video about this just to explain it even a bit more clearly. I just wanted to bring this up because I want to see what you all think about resources in CK3. I know this isn't a new opinion. I know resources have been discussed prior to all of this. But I do think if we at any point start thinking about trade, about why Amalfi had this sort of network, why it was so important, why these trade routes and not any others, we have to talk about resources. And with that, I think we're at the end of this video. A bit of a coherent, incoherent rambling there in the second part. I hope that you can bear with me, but either way, thank you very much for tuning in, and I would like to thank the members of the channel, namely the Barons, the Counts, and the Dukes. And I will see you later. Alligator.